Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana.
Hello, I'm Dan Schneider, a former Montana broadcaster, president of the association, and also a member of the Greater Montana Foundation, which was founded by pioneer broadcaster Ed Craney, who built the first television station in the state, KXLF in Butte. One of our projects of the Greater Montana Foundation is to record for posterity the legends and pioneers of radio and television over the years. And today we have as our special guest certainly a legend here in the Flathead Valley, and that's George Ostrom. George?
Hi, Dan. Thanks for inviting me here, and I'm excited about what we're going to do.
Well, I am too. Tell us, to start off with, where you were born.
I was born in Missoula, Montana, and my dad was a miner in Butte at the time. And the thing about that, actually, the reason I was born in Missoula is because my mother was born in Missoula, delivered by Dr. Ritchie, who was still practicing, and she wanted to have her first baby by the man who delivered her.
Okay.
So, I was born in Missoula, but funny thing happened there a few years ago. I've done a lot of speaking all over, and I was speaking to the Montana Mining Convention in Butte, and I let them know that my dad was a Butte miner and I knew about mines, but I hadn't been born there because my dad did not want me to have to go through life carrying the burden of telling people that I was born in Butte. And of course that got a big round of applause. A couple of guys got left, but anyway, I was born in Missoula, and I was raised pretty much down at Camas Prairie when I was little, near my grandparents had cattle ranches, starving to death, rattlesnakes, rocks, cheatgrass, Mormon crickets. It was not a lovely place to grow up, but I didn't know that at the time. And then my dad became a shift boss at the Flathead Mine, and out of Kyla was at one time the world's richest gold mine. That is rich by the quality of the gold coming out of the ground.
Okay. Now you...
silver, I'm sorry, silver.
That's right. You, as you grew up, you had a career in the U.S. Army for a while.
I guess you'd call it a career. Everybody, World War II is different than the wars we've had since then. There was no doubt about who was right, who was wrong, and what we had to do. And I quit high school when I was 17. I'd gotten loused up. I had been a straight A student, and I got loused up, but I came down out of the hills and went to the high school. I never had any diseases. I got everything in the book. Chicken pox, whooping cough, measles, you name her. I should have taken the year over, but I didn't. And I got behind in school. I wasn't getting good grades, and I joined the Army and wound up in Germany. And thank God the war ended before I got there, but it was a terrible mess. Europe was destroyed. Thousands of people homeless. Millions of people homeless. Thousands a day were dying. And that left me a little cynical. But when I've always been pretty much a very optimistic guy.
Okay, now, when did you get into broadcasting?
I got into broadcasting while I was going to the university, and people asked me, what degree did you get, George? And I said, degree? I was only down there 5 years. Well, anyway, that's kind of a joke, but as you know, I got paid back because here, just a few years ago, I got awarded the University of Montana's Distinguished Alumni Award. Not very many people get that. And when I made my speech, I almost cried.
Oh.
Okay, now back up here. While I was going to university, I had to have some place to get a little money. I became a parachute instructor for the smoke jumpers. I taught parachuting and firefighting. And after, I think it was my 5th year, I jumped on a big fire in the Salmon River. And the wind blew my parachute into a snag that I didn't see, big old dead snag, about 70 feet in the air, and put my parachute over the top. the snag fell over. The emergency parachute on my chest was shoved into my chest. I split my sternum here and broke. I had 7 breaks of ribs on this side, and I broke this leg, a dislocated shoulder, and I got a concussion. Other than that, I was in really good shape. They hauled me out of there with a helicopter. 2 guys had to carry me to the top of a mountain because the helicopter had to lift up off of a cliff and then dive down. The helicopter, the Bell helicopter in those days, didn't operate very well above 5,000 to 6,000 feet. Anyway, but they got me out of there. They carried me up there, put me in a helicopter, and brought me back to Missoula. Now I'm home, out of the hospital, mooching off my old folks, who aren't too old either at that time. Anyway, a little radio station, KOFI, began here, 10,000 watts, I believe. And so I went up there to see if I could get a job. And Les Sterling was in there, and he wanted to know what I wanted, and I said, I'm looking for a job. He said, well, we don't have any opening. Well, I said, well, you would if you'd fire that guy in there. He said, why should we fire him? I said, he can't read, no personality. I don't know how bright he is either. That was kind of a bad thing to say, but anyway, Les thought this is some kind of a nut. He took me in a room, little reel-to-reel recorder, and had me read some news and a couple of ads. He thanked me, and I took my cane and hobbled home. I hadn't been home very long. Sterling was on the phone and said, get your you-know-what up here. I've let that guy go. And that was, well, about 56 years ago.
1956.
57 years ago. My time flies when you're having fun. Anyway.
What did you do?
I just spun records and gave the news, and of course, in those days, you gave a lot of the commercials, just read them, and I tried to read different ones, a little differently and everything. I'd been there about 3 days when I was on the board doing my job, and a tall man with wearing a suit. He always wore a suit. Bill Patterson was a partner of Sterling's, and he came in, and he introduced himself and said he was the boss and that Les was his partner, and he was the boss by a partnership agreement. Anyway, he said, you sound pretty good. I've been listening to you. Come up the river. He said, what's Les paying you? I said, he's paying me $1 an hour. Bill said, it's $2.
You got your first raise.
Got my first raise right there, and Bill and I became good friends. I took his kids fishing. We got really good friends over the years, and eventually, when the last time I came back to work there, he begged me to come back to work, and I was flattered by that. And I said, okay, 2 things. I get a chance to buy the station, and you get a couple of computers in here. I can't remember what year that was. It must have been in the 80s. Well, anyway, I had a little experience there that was very eye-waking. I was broke, in debt because of my injuries and everything, and I was in the bank trying to borrow a little money one day, and the next stall over, there were just trees and things between them, bushes in the old Conrad Bank, and Bill Patterson came in. I couldn't help it over here. He was trying to borrow a little money to meet payday. I thought that the guys in business for themselves, they're rich. My dad was a miner, remember? And so, the next day I went, after I got off my shift at 1 o'clock, I went and talked to Bill. I said, Bill, you know, I'm not really doing very much, going around chasing girls, drinking beer, and trying to pay off my debts. Maybe you could let me go selling ads in the afternoon. I'm a pretty good salesman, I said. He said, oh, he was just lit up like a Christmas tree. Oh, thanks, George. So he assigned me Columbia Falls, Whitefish. Can't remember if we went to Summers and Big Fork or not, but anyway, now I'm out there selling ads, huh? Well, that's how I met Iris. She worked for the railroad there. I was selling radio advertising up there, and I had planned to go back. I was running on adrenaline at the time I was injured, and the smoke jumpers furnished expertise of parachuting to people like the CIA, you know.
Now you married Iris, and
But when I married Iris, boy, that's the best, the smartest day I ever did.
you had some children.
Had 4 children. We got 2 boys and 2 girls, and they're all here in the Flathead. My daughter Wendy worked with me at the radio station for, I don't know, I remember 17, 18 years, and she was a top announcer in Montana news, and I can prove that with the record. Associated Press and the Montana Broadcasters Association gave her more awards during that time than anybody could even come close to.
She followed in her father's footsteps.
I have received more awards, Dan, than I deserve, and I never asked for an award. And I'm not that nice a guy.
You were inducted into the Montana Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
Right, I was taken to the Montana Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and I didn't know why or anything. That wasn't my goal in life, but I was very, very honored and felt good about it.
You set a tone for broadcast news that was a little bit different because of some of the crazy language that you used, and also you did something that was very interesting with the police blotter.
Well, giving news can sometimes be depressing.
Yes.
There's so much bad stuff happens, and I happen to be a cockeyed optimist, and I've studied history, and I know that we will come through this. We've always come through. Whatever bad things happen, and there are certain things that happen, but life is made up of a lot more good things than bad things. And I try to get that across in my news. The day came when I put together a partnership, and we became owners of KOFI, and I was a manager. I got to do what I wanted to do. I was a very straight news reporter. I didn't monkey around. Oh, I'd stick in I remember one time some gangster in New York, member of the mafia, was shot while he was getting his haircut. Somebody just walked in and shot him in the eye. And in giving that story, I said, you know how that feels.
You had some special names for some of the people.
Well, after I took over there, I did. I started with the sheriffs and police news because most of it is kind of stupid. I mean, it's crazy. I call them dingbats, wingnuts, and Looney Tunes. I still do that. I did it this morning.
Okay.
And with that, it adds a tone to the news, so people can find something at least to get a little smile about. And I tried to pick out some that match that. And of course, you get calls from people. They'd call you. One guy, he was drawing unemployment, and he got a good job, but he kept drawing the unemployment. Didn't tell anybody he had a job. Well, they finally caught up with him, and the papers filed in the court by the sheriff's department said he had drawn $1,800 that he hadn't earned. He didn't deserve that. And I said that on the radio. And it wasn't very long. He called me up. Ostrom, you know what you're talking about. Da-da-da-da-da. He said, I only took $1,200. You can see, that's the kind of people. I used to get a lot of calls like that. I used to get threatened. I've threatened with lawsuits. I've been sued a few times. I've never lost one. But anyway, another thing, I describe, I still do that. A typical thing, I said, the Columbia Falls police arrested a man last night, had a hard time getting him in the patrol car, took him down and put him in jail. He's commode hugging, knuckle walking, snockered. He called me up and said, I wasn't knuckle walking. I said, well, what does it matter? I said, I didn't give your name. He said, I was the only one arrested last night in Columbia Falls, so everybody will know. Anyway, it's a wonderful, wonderful business, and I'm so glad I got into it. Hitting that snag in the Salmon River in 1955 or whenever it was the best thing ever happened to me.
Now you You always had a nose for news, and you decided to go into the newspaper business.
The reason I did that is I wasn't always in the news, but even when I was working at the bank or working with my brother at Bell Trailers, I kept my contact in the radio business. Many's a day I quit what I was doing at the bank or someplace and went and reported stories on the radio because I liked to do it and I covered the news. Well, anyway, I went to Washington, D.C., as you know, as a Kennedy New Frontiersman to help write. I worked for Metcalf and wrote the Wilderness, Wild Scenic Rivers bill. I helped on that. Well, when I came home, Patterson met me practically at the city limits, begged me to come back to work, and I did. But then later on, I went to work over at the bank, and when I couldn't stand that. Banking is the dullest business.
Yeah.
The man who got my job is now a multimillionaire.
Okay.
Money wasn't that important to me, but
So the newspaper.
so I went and bought the newspaper. And
Okay.
we were a bunch of guys sitting around the table, not drinking.
This was a weekly, Kalispell Weekly
Kalispell
News.
Weekly News. I was complaining about the daily paper, and I said, I was finding all sorts of things wrong with it. And they said, well, Ostrom, you're such a hot shot. Why don't you see if you can do better by the Kalispell Weekly? I did it. I went down and talked to Ed Tribbett because his dad had died. His dad loved that paper, and Ed didn't like it and didn't want to run it one more day. So I made a deal with him, and I bought the paper. And then, of course, I had to get my nerve up to go home and tell Iris. Most guys do not buy a practically bankrupt newspaper without asking their wife. Anyway, I went home, explained it to her with glowing terms because he didn't like running it. I got it for a special price. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, it turned out my whole family ran that paper. All my kids worked there. My wife worked there. And we ran it. It was the lowest circulation newspaper in the state of Montana. There were 72 weeklies and 11 dailies in those days. And in 4 years, we were the largest weekly. And 2 years later, we passed 4 or 5 of the dailies. So I was very proud of that. But I had to sell the paper because a man can't work 26 hours a day. I had other businesses too. I had got in a partnership with some guys on some land business. Anyway.
One of the things that you did is you wrote a weekly column. You still do.
I started writing a weekly column. When I got back to Washington during the Kennedy administration, I wrote a letter to Mel Reuter and explaining how they do things back there. I mentioned that they have live people riding around in long black cars and stuff like that. Well, he loved it. He ran the paper and he said, George, could you write me a letter every week? Well, that's 54 years ago. I continued to call him in my paper for a while I had it. But then when I got out of that business, I went right back to writing for Mel. And Mel, of course, would enter the paper in national. Mel won more when Mel Reuter was running the Hungry Horse News. That paper won more national awards and state awards than any paper there was.
He was also a good photographer.
Yeah, and well, he was a good reporter, and he was a great technician, and for getting the paper out in a, well, look at the pictures he run on the front. Anyway, he entered me, and I'm very proud to say that I think I won 4 national awards as the top weekly columnist for papers under 10,000 circulation. So anyway, that was a fun thing, and I'm still doing it.
You started the Over the Hill gang.
I didn't really start the Over the Hill gang. The Over the Hill gang existed before. It was a group of characters around this town. They called it the Thursday Hiking Club.
Oh.
But I got to noticing them, and they all looked pretty old to me. So I called them the Over the Hill gang.
I thought so.
And then they decided, well, that maybe I should hike with them. And I used to hike with Danny On and Hal Cancer, and both of them were killed.
Yes.
Died. And so I joined the Over the Hill gang. And the siege of that went back to World War II. They lowered the age limit from 18 to 16 where you could work in the park, clearing the trails and in the park and the Forest Service and the State Forest. They needed people. The young guys all went to war. Well, Ivan O'Neill, my best friend, who started the Western Building Centers, and his cousin Bob and Walter Barr, Big Fort, we went and lied. I don't think it's lying, it's fibbing. Is that lesser sin?
Yes.
Okay. We fibbed a little bit about our age. But Carter Helseth, who did the hiring in those days for the Forest Service, needed people so badly. I looked like I was 10 years old and about 5 feet 3 inches tall. Anyway, he hired us, and we did it. We fell in love with the great outdoors. And after we put our time in the service and college, came home, got married, started business, we decided we're going to climb the mountains.
You climbed a lot of mountains.
Ivan has climbed the most. I think he's got to be someplace around 150, 160, but he's pretty modest. He won't tell. We've climbed on all of them, not to the top. Some of them we can't. We've had a couple of our guys die up there, and we've had some injured, and but it's worth it. It's worth it.
You also skied.
And we downhill skied, and we did it every winter. And of course, it's a funny thing. Being in the park all the time like that gave me access to news. I would come. It's one time there was an accident up there where a rider fell off the horse. Never fall off your horse on the downhill side in Glacier Park.
Okay.
They may never find you.
All right.
Anyway, I happened to be there, and then after they got the guy rescued and everything, I was sitting around with a bunch of the rangers, and one of them said, "How come when something like this happens, Ostrom's up here?" And another one says, "Why is it when Ostrom is up here, something like this happens?" I have it's just luck or something. 2 weeks before this, what I'm telling you about, was when the man and his daughter were attacked by a grizzly bear on the trail up to Grinnell Lake on the cliff. They fell over the cliff. They almost died. They got them out with the helicopter on a short line. The Daily Paper had a picture the next day of the short line hauling those people out. My picture.
Wow.
So that's the thing that happens, but you can't get the news if you aren't where the news is happening.
Speaking of pictures, you had 3 books. Wondrous Wildlife.
I did that one with my son. My son is in the Veterans Home, and he was a ranger in Yellowstone for 5 years and 5 years in Glacier. And the muscular dystrophy, myotonic muscular dystrophy, made him a cripple. And for his morale, more than anything else, I went with him and we made this book of pictures we took of wild animals ever since he was a little kid. And then those 2 books, Glacier Secrets 1 and Volume 2 are about the over the hill and our adventures, the grizzly bears and whatever.
Goat Trails and Grizzly Tales.
Yep. I got a picture in there. One of our guys fell off of a mountain and was, well, he fell thousands of feet. I say 1,000 in there. There's a reason for that. But I cover what we did and what we do. And right now, this is the only one we got for sale. These are out of print. There's a long story on it. I won't tell about it. But the publishing company that owns this got in trouble, and they quit publishing the book. What the hell are you doing? They said, well, our little plan for how you got to sell so many to be worth printing. And so I talked them into letting me print them. So we're using Ivan's money and my personality.
Okay.
And it's great.
Okay.
We sold thousands of those.
What's happened to news today?
News today has become more of showmanship than covering the news. I am disgusted. Brian Williams, every night on NBC, they should put chicken feathers on him. He's Chicken Little.
Okay.
The worst thing, Dan Rather was another one. There is a way to report news and be factual without going into only those details which make it seem worse than it is. news in Montana. There is no competition. The AP is so undermanned that they won't even take credit. They'll say, according to the Billings Gazette, Charlie Brown held up the store last night. They won't say, Charlie Brown held up the store. Go do the work. See if Charlie Brown held up the store. I don't know how many people work for AP. And we don't have UP anymore, so there's no competition for news services in Montana. How am I approaching that? I will work with any media there are. I work with these people here. They know that. The news people here know me. If I see something happening that's going on, I'll call the Interlake. Media, if media all works together, we don't need AP, UP. That's a hand that is dealt us. That's the way it is. But why shouldn't I call the Interlake, the daily paper, or the Beacon and give them the news? The Beacon is a weekly newspaper, all right? Radio is instant.
Okay.
The Interlake only comes out once a day. The radio comes out every 20 minutes.
You're still on the air, George.
I'm still on the air.
This has been fun, and thank you for some of your stories and some of your tales, and thank you for your endurance over the years.
I'm thankful for my endurance. Good to talk to you, Dan.
This concludes our program today. These programs will eventually appear on the Montana Historical Channel YouTube, and we hope that you'll take a moment to watch them. Some of them are already there. This is Dan Schneider. Thank you for listening.
This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.